All right, what's going on, guys? We're back. You guys saw the last episode. We got a chance to talk to, well, you already know who it is, Taco Mike, TacoMoto Co. And, well, we said, we talked a lot about business in the last episode. Said, let's get into the nerdy stuff. Let's talk about bikes. Let's talk about how we build bikes, what we do, some of the components, because I'm kind of curious. We were just talking about it off air a little bit. I think we share a lot of the same thought process behind a bike. So I'm curious to know your side and how you're picking components and what you do and what you guys do on bike builds, because I think admittedly I like building bikes more than I like riding them. So
yeah, me too.
So,
truth be told, the desire that I have is to create a machine that takes itself out of the conversation. So I am not a very talented or skilled writer. I have the desire, level 100, to be a pro level writer, to do the kinds of writing tricks and feats that you and I watch professional writers do. Like that, I want that so much. And yet I don't have the athleticism. I don't have the skills, the training, the stamina. I don't want to injure myself. Like I have too many psychological holdups to become that kind of a writer. It's not me. I'm not going to do that in this life. So I have to have a machine that bridges the gap and does as much possible for me. So that means I need to have a machine that, so for example, on my bike, my personal bike right now is a 24 Husky 501. And it has stuff that in the groups and the forums, the trolls are going to turn their nose up at and then call me a weakling, right? They're gonna laugh at me because I have a recluse clutch. I have an ECU with traction control and quick shift, and I have a wide seat and custom tuned suspension. Like I've done things, I put things on my bike that somebody would say, well, Malcolm Smith didn't have any of that, and yet look what he did. And I understand that. Like I accept the criticism. Call me out. I don't care. I need, with my age and my reduced physical limitations and my lack of talent, I have to have a bike that does so many things for me. And then I guess my concept is if I have a bike that is absolutely spec'd out, dialed in, and set up to me and my limitations, really, then if I can take the machine out of the component, then I only can blame myself when things go sideways. And that's actually very beneficial to me as an enthusiast, because there's a big psychological deterrent that happens if I'm riding, and we've all done this. I've been in a situation where sometimes it really is the bike. There's something not set up or something's broken or whatever, and that just loops in my head, and I'm sucking in that area or in that moment. And then I realize, well, some of it's me, but then it's this damn bike and the thing, and I just can get hung up and strung out and looped out on the baggage, the mental baggage that comes from knowing that there's something up with the bike. If I can eliminate that, reduce that, and just make that go away, then I just need to worry about myself, right? And so it's very freeing mentally to just think, okay, now body positioning, foot position, where am I? How am I feeling? How am I interacting with the machine? Where are my balance points? Yeah. If I eliminate the bike, now I just focus on myself. So I've freed up a huge amount of bandwidth in my experience, because I know it's not the bike. The bike is so sorted. And that's, again, maybe one of the philosophies that we have at TacoMoto is I want to be able to offer a rider a bike that is so well tuned, crafted, adjusted, and set up for you that the feedback I want to get from one of our build customers is that's the best motorcycle I've ever ridden. Yeah. And that's not so much about us. What that speaks to is that we listened to, what that says is you did a really good job explaining to us what you want, what you're after, what your need case is. And then we listened, and then we responded accordingly with the right parts, setup, and adjustments for you. So when somebody says that's the best bike I've ever ridden, which is what we're kind of chasing, again, congratulations to you, rider. You're riding that dream bike because you did a great job telling us what you wanted. Yeah. And that's a very interesting point, because
like we were talking about this earlier, is right. We see, and we'll talk about the brand coming up that we've seen this the most for recently, but it seems like a lot of people will have opinions about how a bike should ride versus what they need to do to make it ride that way. We were like, in other words, saying is like, well, I want a bike that's plush, but plush to you is different than plush to me and plush to them, you know, because the speeds are different, the terrain is different, there's so much to it. So when somebody contacts you, right, and it comes time to doing a bike build, kind of where do you even start with that? Because that conversation could go everywhere. I mean, you watch videos of like Formula One and MotoGP and all of these guys where they've got a race engineer. You know, you're like the race engineer for these guys, right?
That is very
So
yeah.
how does that conversation happen? You know, we've seen, I mean, we know what the conversation is like with Verstappen and those guys. Like we know how they talk to their engineers, but how's that conversation with you? Like, if okay, I want to build a bike, how does that go? You know?
I am envisioning myself as like a motorcycle Adrian Newey. If you're into Formula One, you know who that guy is. I'm not comparing myself to him at all, but like Adrian Newey is the guy who essentially creates the machine that then, you know, Verstappen and Perez and in Formula One, that's the Red Bull team. They get to benefit from like his experience and knowledge. They create a word picture. So maybe to say it differently, a little more relatable, like if you go to a restaurant and, you know, I want a steak and you paint a word picture. So if you're communicating, say the chef comes out, it's not the waiter. You get a chance to talk to the chef and you say, look, hey, chef, I want a steak and you just paint a word picture. An experienced, wise chef will in tune and create, and you've created a vision in his head, and then he'll use his knowledge and expertise to basically deliver a product that you have you paint enough of a detailed word picture, he'll probably nail it for you.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the best steak you ever had because he made the steak you wanted in your mind. You imagined a product and he delivered. And that's what we're trying to do. We have a process if somebody wants to use our build program. So we look at a dirt bike. We focus again, like was mentioned before, the Austrian bikes. So it'd be the Husqvarna, KTM, Gas, and primarily the enduro headlight bikes. So that would look like the 350 to 501 EXCF model, XFW, FE, FES, or ES on the gas side. Like that little model bracket, very limited. Like we've so narrowly focused, and that's so we can ultra specialize. So somebody who wants us to build a bike for them, we have a process that's we work with Paul Stewart, RTW Paul. He's a pretty well-known guy in the dual sport KTM world, and so he and I created a whole model that looks like a conversation that may go an hour or two or three. They have, and we have a spreadsheet with hundreds of data points, and we take the motorcycle from axle to axle, and we have broken the motorcycle down part by part. We've identified areas to either replace, upgrade, modify, change, hundreds of points, and then the conversation can be as detailed as you want. And you know who the most detailed customers probably are as a group? It's airline pilots. When we work with an airline pilot, because think about that airline pilot, like he has to become a subject matter master for the entire aircraft, because he's operating a machine with millions of parts, and any part that goes wrong in the air, he has to have a contingency plan for it. So an airline pilot is a great customer. We love those guys and gals, ladies, because they want to get into the weeds. We like getting into the weeds. And if a rider wants to do that, we're happy to do that. But then we have other riders who are just like, hey, we trust you guys. I weigh this, I ride like this, I like orange and black, make something cool. And we, you know, so we have both ends of the spectrum. But if somebody wants to build a bike that is so unique to them that they will ride it and say, that's the best dirt bike experience I've ever had, we're chasing that. And again, that's not so much about us. It's about you. You've done a good job telling us what you want. And then we have access to the best parts, methods, materials. And then in some instances, we make parts because maybe nothing existed, or somebody wants to do something that's so unique and particular to them that we realize we have to make a thing to be able to accomplish that, we'll do it.
Yeah.
And we look at that motorcycle completely holistically. If we change the power dynamics, well, that will change suspension characteristics and vice versa. And so we understand and comprehend how one thing affects another thing. And then we will, with that machine, we could make a bike for somebody that I would hate to ride because I'm not that rider. And they would hate my bike and my setup. We're chasing ultimate, I don't want to use the word perfection, but we're chasing ultimate optimization that is specific to that specific rider.
That rider. And you know, then that's really, what I find that's really cool about that is that when you go to start, I think it's, I don't want to say it, I'm going to say the term or the phrase at our level, right? And I only say that in the way that we get a bike and we're the DIY guys. We're the guys that want to find the best possible components and we're not afraid to do the research on it. And so oftentimes we struggle with that. It's like, I have to go to this place to talk about ECUs. I have to go to this place to talk about suspension. I have to go to this place to talk about, and so
specialize in a one category area.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that it's more of you guys take more of a holistic approach. It's like, tell me your diet and I will give you a meal with what you're looking for. And I think that's really cool because a lot of times, especially when we get into new bikes, and again, I'll allude to it again, but we're going to talk Kove here in a minute. You know, that's kind of what's happening is that there's a lot of specialty stuff going on, but there's not a place where all of that is together yet. You know, there's the forearms and there's that, but it takes a little bit of experience, I think, before you can jump in and say, nope, this is definitely round. And that's well, it's kind of ovalish if you look at it in this, you know, you get all these different opinions. But so I think that's really cool that you guys do that as a holistic, you know, as the whole picture, rather than, no, all we do is ECUs, all we do is exhausts, all we do is this. So for a new bike guy, you know, are there like ground rules where you guys talk, like, do you guys send a guy out on, like, did you already buy the bike? How many hours have you ridden it? You know, well, why don't you get to the first break-in service and then come see us, or, you know, how early, right? I couldn't train my puppy before 5 weeks. So how early would you guys take on a bike, you know, dealership new or?
Yeah. So if somebody comes to us to do a bike build, we often will source the bike for them and then take delivery of the bike before they've ever touched it. So we work with customers all over the country. We can do it all over the world. We're not location dependent because we can ship bikes. People can fly in. We've had customers fly to Las Vegas, get their bike, and then take off and ride a BDR or a TAT or something like that. And in those instances with bike shipping, it doesn't really matter where you live or where we are. We're in Las Vegas, but it's almost irrelevant. And yeah, so 0-hour bike. So we'll take a new bike in, and our process begins on the dyno. When we get a brand new bike, we will immediately throw it on the dyno because we want to know what kind of power profile that machine is making from zero. We'll start it up for the first time. And then, so we want to have like a before power graph, and then we'll do the changes and the mods, and then we do a dyno run after. We also break in the bike, the engine on the dyno. So instead of going out and running up and down the street a few times to like break a motor in, we do it on the dyno with a formulated set of procedures. So it's exact and everyone is the same. And it's very, you know, it's just this analytical approach to how the process can be done. And the machine is like a 0-hour bike. We just strip them down and we do the detailed PDIs that the dealers aren't doing. You know, we'll pull all the bearings out, grease all the bearings. And so we'll take a 0-hour bike and just tear it apart and just start, you know, ripping it down. And it's great. It's so fun. And we don't take old bikes in. We are not a repair shop. You know, there are plenty of shops out there who will do service and rebuilds and those kinds of things. That's not us. We are building new bikes from scratch for very discerning riders with a very specific goal and outcome and use case in mind. And that's sort of the world we have created for ourselves, and that's what we do.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and that, I mean, and that's good to know. I mean, it's an interesting thing because I was recently, well, when I was on Project 501 and building that bike up, the suspension was a big topic, and I was able to talk to a couple of guys that were, it's almost like it was like a very select few people even knew who this guy was that did suspension. And ultimately I didn't go with him. I you know, it was both a cost thing and knowing my riding ability and what I was going to end up with. But there was a very good point that was made, and that is when you start with a platform that's already been worked, right? Already been broken in. That 501 has got 300 hours on it. It was basically said is like, until the bike, all the bearings, everything has gone through, the motor is rebuilt, then it's worth your time to have me do the suspension. And at first I was like, God, what a dick. You know, I'm like, dude, I'm willing to give you money for this because I've heard that this is the best it could be. You're the top. But then after a little bit, I thought about it and I'm going, no, there's a point to that. And it's the bike pulls differently. The chassis is different.
Yeah.
I mean,
Everything affects everything.
Everything affects everything. The chassis gets soft over time. I was recently at Baja Rally and I was talking to Tony Palandrani, one of the competitors down there, and he's on the same platform, an older, 16 FE 501, and he's saying the same thing. He's yeah, the chassis is just tired and he can feel it. Now, could I didn't notice that? I don't know, but now it's in the back of my head.
You might have a sense of it, but you wouldn't be able to maybe pinpoint this was
what was happening.
Whereas a professional rider can be like, oh, I can feel that the swing arm has X or Y and the dynamics, or the engine hanger torque specs or whatever.
Yeah,
they can feel that level.
Oh yeah, that they start talking. Well, loosen it up 2 Newton meters, or they come up to you and they go that
drill a hole here, weld a gusset there, and that'll solve your problem.
That'll solve it. Yeah. I go, this chassis feels like it's got 20 hours and 2 minutes on it. Huh. Yeah. It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
We talked to these guys.
Yeah. It's like, come on. Like, I'm just trying. But, it's definitely an interesting thing to see how, the platform. So starting from a baseline of 0, I think is really cool. That way you guys have like, okay, we know the entire history of this bike. We know what the chassis is going to be like. We know all of these things. We're going to know if this motor was built on a Friday at 4:00, You're going to know these things. You're going to experience them when you start with a 0-hour bike, especially and I guess this is the PSA or public service announcement part of it. If you think that your showroom bike has the adequate amount of grease on all of the bearings in it, you should reconsider that theory, because it doesn't. It gets built quickly. It gets built just enough to make it through its first service. And that's it.
Yes. So that is the key. So people will, on the forums, the trolls on the forums and boards will say, that all these damn manufacturers, they don't know how to build a bike. They know exactly what they're doing. They're just building it for that first service use. And it has adequate grease for that first service. And then you have to service your machine. So there I don't know where people get this in their head, but like, for example, electrical system maintenance, that's an actual thing. And harnesses have a lifespan, and electrical connections need to be checked, serviced, and there are procedures and protocols for dealing with that. There are procedures and protocols for the chassis, and they require attention. And when people complain that their bike, quality isn't what it was, or they don't put enough grease in there, no, they're doing exactly, they know what they're doing. And then you have to then do your part at the required service intervals. And when you don't, and then you complain, then you're the dummy. You're the weak link, not the manufacturer. It's you, because you haven't serviced and maintained the machine properly. So when people have preventable electrical system failures, that's not the bike's fault. It's the rider's fault or the mechanic's fault for not understanding the dynamics of wear and tear, and then preventively eliminating those breakdowns and failures. So when we get a bike, we start everything from 0. The clock is set at 0, and we do everything that is factory level. We know what Dakar mechanics do to prepare a bike. We know that a Dakar level mechanic will get a 0-hour bike from his OEM, and then we know what he does to get that bike ready to be on the start line at Dakar. We do that to our bikes in our shop. And sometimes that means we are doing things that the OEM didn't do because at the production level, they don't take the time or the expense or care to do some of those really high level things. But other times it's just routine stuff that the factory did. We just double check it. We just put a second set of eyes on it.
Yeah. Securing the harnesses and things like that. And it's interesting that you mentioned the electrical system maintenance on these bikes is, that I don't know that we're necessarily yet on these bikes to CAN bus systems. I mean, I see that on BMWs.
We are on the small bikes, on 22.5 up, KTM competition bikes and 24 up, enduro bikes. They're all now CAN bus driven.
Yeah. So, it's a very interesting thing that I see is my former background is as I worked for Tesla, and we had to do vehicle troubleshooting. I wasn't part of actually physically doing that, but I saw the manuals, I saw the things, conducting pin drag tests.
Correct.
And that's something that,
I have a video that talks about pin drag.
Yeah. And if you haven't seen that, you got to see it, because a pin drag test is really simple. You're just checking for wear. You're literally, that's your, that connection, not
mechanical connection. You're testing the mechanical connection.
And if you don't, I mean, all it has to do is be off by a little bit, and especially on a CAN bus system. And if it's the communication line, all you need is a little bit of interference. And now the bike's thinking, oh, it wants me to shift. I didn't touch the shifter. I hit the brakes. I needed you to turn on the brake light, not change gears or cut off it's interesting, and I see it in BMW, and I've seen, especially when there was that transition on BMW motorcycles, when they went to that CAN bus system, and people were installing auxiliary lights and all of these heated gear and all of this stuff.
Introducing new data streams into the data stream, and the ECMs
or grabbed the wrong line, thinking that it was a hot.
Oh, there's power. I'll take that power.
That's not power. That's that's
data
signal. That's a data line. And now all of a sudden you've just trashed an entire harness, because there is no really legit way to repair that, because resistance and stuff like that is going to play a part into what that.
Will you explain just generically and briefly what the heck CAN bus system even is?
So CAN bus system, right? Now we're getting into the fancy, right? It's no longer just positive and negative on a bike or on a vehicle or any of this stuff. Now you're introducing a communication line, and what it's doing is it's making, instead of having to run a wire to every single glass component on a bike,
which would be kind of considered analog. So we're sort of moving from the analog age into the digital age.
Yeah. And so how are we going to do that? It's like the internet connection, right? An internet connection is comprised of a few different cables, but at the end of the day, you're sending data pulses, you're sending different values, and the ECU on the bike, which has now become even more complicated, takes that data and says, oh, you want me to do this? Oh, you want me to do that? So it becomes a very delicate system. But basically what you're doing is you have your positive, your negative, and now you have a communication line, CAN bus. So it's really, really cool technology. But like we know in building bikes and anything off-road and anything, the more complicated you make it, and sometimes it makes it more complicated to diagnose.
Another thing that KTM has done on their dirt bike line, not only do they have a CAN bus now on the new ECM, new generation bikes, but they have switched over to PDM, so power distribution modules on the small bike. So on your bike, you have a fuse box, 5 fuses, and then 3 relays. So that would be an analog. The ECU receives a signal input from a sensor or some variable happens, and the ECU says, so to take the simple one of like the fan. The bike has a single, since 2017 on, the 12 through 16 bikes had a temperature sensor that went to the ECU, and the ECU used that for fueling. And then it had in the radiator, if you have the older generation bikes, you had a little brass plug in the bottom of the radiator on the right-hand side with 2 spade plugs coming out of it, and that was your fan on and off. So that was a thermal switch that just cycled the fan on and off. Well, on 17, they integrated that signal into the ECU with 1 temp sensor. So they got rid of that sensor. Now the ECU temp sensor makes the fan on and off decisions, and then it grounds the hot side of the coil on the relay to then complete the circuit to run the fan. Well, that circuit, that system, where the hell is I going with this?
Yeah. Well, now it's
the PDM.
Communicating. Yeah.
Okay. So sorry. I'm just thinking so much about that thermal switch, because people will say, oh, I hate when they got rid of that thermal switch, because you could get different temperature thermal switches to have authority over when your fan turned on.
Mm-hmm.
So when we make something simpler to manufacture or simpler to operate, it becomes less, the user loses the ability to make changes and manipulations.
Yeah.
So when you move to FI, you did away with the carburetor. We have a generation of riders who are familiar with carbs, and they could change their own jetting and do their own AFR changes and all of that.
Yeah.
Well, now it's locked up in a computer, and the rider mechanic can't have access to that anymore. So the relay, so where I was going, I remember the PDMs. So now you have, instead of even your generation bike, 3 relays and 5 fuses, the new bikes, no fuses, no relays, because there's a solid state switch that it's a PDM, it's a power distribution module. KTM calls it the OCU, off-road control unit. And what it does is the ECU sends a signal to that to turn the fan on, to activate lighting when the engine is on, the fuel pump and the ECU, those functions that used to be handled in relays, and then things that had fuses now have a solid state circuit breaker. In essence, if you short one of those circuits, then internally it cuts power, and then as soon as the short goes away, then it internally automatically restores power.
Yeah.
So you could short a thing, and the OCU will decouple power from that. You restore it, and it comes back. So you could play with, you could test it. You could short a thing, and it'll just recycle it.
Cycle through it.
So it's easy to operate and easy to own in that you don't have to chase fuses and relays, but you don't have access to pulling power off things. You can't really add things. So you get and you give, or you lose. You give and you lose. Each change benefits a thing, it obsoletes a thing. Some riders love the improvement, some riders hate the improvement. There's no such thing as anything staying the same, and there's no such thing as everybody loves everything.
Yeah, no. And coming from, like, we do a lot of, working at the BMW shop with BMW Motorrad, is we get, like, for instance, we get a lot of guys that want to do auxiliary lighting, right? So we don't really see, I mean, we do see that in off-road bikes. It's usually they want to put higher powered lights on the bike, but on BMW side of things that's usually what they want to do. And yeah, when the bikes were back in the day were analog, right? Before they going to this CAN bus system, it was a relay, a trigger wire from something that was switched power. So turn the key on, and then that circuit powers the relay, and then you can control it with your on and off switch. Cool. That was easy. So that all went away, right? Is what we're talking about, is now this transition where that went away, and now all of these bikes are CAN bus. But what did we gain from that is, before you had to wire an extra switch in, well, now you have CAN bus openers that you plug directly into the bike, and now your turn signal cancel button is your on off switch for the lights. And now you can flash the high beams, and you've got, strobe mode where, it just blinds everybody, and you can dim the lights. You can do all of these things. So
you hit the horn, and then you get like,
all these things,
full function.
All of these things just because of CAN bus.
Yeah.
So like you're saying, it's like, it's a trade one for the other. I don't know. I guess it depends on where you come, like your mindset.
Is it better or is it worse?
Yeah, exactly. Is it more complicated?
It's both of those.
But, and as things get better, right? I mean, all of these things, I bet the first CAN bus system sucked. I remember early on.
BMW and Bosch created the first CAN bus system.
Yeah. And that's, how many years ago now? At least it's been around at least a decade. And so it's something that it has progressed and is just only getting more and more complicated, more and more ECUs, more and more control units and stuff like that. But there is a certain curve of reliability that's also coming with that. Kind of cool to see.
I for sure think that these bikes are as reliable. So I did this informal poll to talk about reliability. There's a myth out there that old bikes, because you can work on them, points, condensers, not so much on dirt bikes, but the old CDIs and no electronics, there's a myth that, and carburetors, there's a myth that those bikes are more reliable. And so I put an informal poll out in one of our Facebook groups and asked, so the old timers, which bike has been less problem prone, your old 77, YZ250, or your new KTM 500. And overwhelmingly, the new bike was more reliable And as much, there was some soul searching that a couple of posters had to do. They're like, it hurts me to have to admit this, but damn it, the new bike is more reliable and I do less maintenance. And they said, like, my initial thought was no, the old one, but then I sat and I thought about it and I realized, no, I have been broken down so many times on my old bike, and yet this new 500, like, I put gas in, change the oil, and I don't do anything to it.
It just runs.
Yeah, and so if you, on the new bike, what I would say is for anybody, do your maintenance, understand what a full maintenance package looks like, and then make sure you have, flat proof your tire system, and then have a jump start, restart type of capability to, if your battery goes dead because you don't have a Kickstarter anymore, if you can start your bike with a dead battery and you can, prevent or eliminate flats, that bike will be more reliable than any machine you've ever had.
Than you have. And that, and that's a really interesting, to me, we were talking about this a little bit earlier. I think that's really important, especially when it comes to the maintenance side of it. So I come from a racing background. My dad, we basically grew up racing Baja bugs out in the desert and went to 1600s and all that. And I remember when I wanted to be the navigator in the car, the co-driver, it wasn't, okay, yeah, let's go. You think about it, it's maybe the parents' dream to want to have their kid with them and all that stuff. But there was a qualifying process, and that qualifying process.
Your dad was qualifying you to be able to take that responsibility.
Yeah, to be on there. And it wasn't because he didn't trust that I would tell him where to go or what to do, or it wasn't that. It was, if we're broken down, you need to know what to do. And ultimately when I wanted to be, I want to drive. It's like, well, you're not going to drive until you know every aspect of the car. You know the shims that it takes to shim the front end on the Volkswagen to make sure that it's perfect and it won't bind and it won't do this.
Makes sense. Your dad's smart.
The wiring and all that stuff. So I think it's interesting when we talk about, like, when the internet trolls, right? The forum and whatever title we want to give them, but there's people on the internet that say, well, the bike, I paid $12,000. That bike should be turnkey ready to go. Absolutely. From here until 600 miles. Or from here, whatever the brake inserts is. But it's almost like, what are we really fighting, though? You're literally arguing and fighting, gaining the knowledge, learning about your bike and learning about the ins and outs of it and learning what to do. Because I would much rather ride with somebody that out in the middle of nowhere goes like, oh yeah, that's, you need to do this and this and this. And
some of the full comprehensive understanding.
Yeah.
The guy who's done his own maintenance and bought a manual. The manual is your best friend. The best friend your bike ever had is you, and correct tools and a manual. And some motorcycles will come with a free manual. Some you can download them. Some you have to pay. KTM. Unfortunately, I think this is wrong-headed, but KTM charges for the factory repair manual.
Yep.
The owner's manual, almost no bikes anymore come with a paper owner's manual. Those are all downloaded across the board from the manufacturer. But the factory repair manual, I think it's wrong that KTM charges for that. It should be free. It should be downloadable for free from their website. So KTM, you should be free on your downloaded. If you want to buy a physical copy, that's different.
Yeah.
You want to order a hard copy, charge for that. But to put a paywall, there you go, KTM. Put a paywall for your manual, I think that's bad and wrong. Who does it right? Kove. Teased a little bit ago.
Yeah.
Kove.
Yeah. Let's talk about that bike, because that's been. Yeah. I think we should jump into that. But you're right. Let's talk very specifically that, because we're going to back into some other conversations that we've seen with the bike, component wise, and how people view this bike from afar. But that, you made a very good point, because that's not, I'm guilty. I'm 100% guilty of that. I have not read the manual. So as they say, RTFM in the motorcycle industry, I have not read the manual. So
RTFM.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about this. So what did you find when it came time to look at the manuals and Kove stuff?
So let's talk about my brief. I don't have a lot of experience with a Kove, but the more I learn about that machine, the more I want to continue to pursue a relationship with it. So when I first heard about the Kove and looked at the first one, I had an agenda to disprove or discredit or to knock it down. Like, I had seen YouTube videos and I'd heard a lot of praise about it, and there was a buzz and people generally saying very good, positive things about it. And I in my the arrogance coming from a perspective of, well, I work on Austrian bikes. These are the premium. These are the best motorcycles in their class that money can buy, right? Arguably, the Austrian branded dirt bikes are the best dirt bikes that you can buy.
Mm-hmm.
So I came to the Kove with an attitude, an agenda, an ego of like, a Chinese dirt bike. Like, okay, this is going to suck. Because generally, you can buy a Chinese dirt bike from Walmart in Ensenada. You can buy a Chinese dirt bike at Pep Boys. They are low tech, low function, low creativity, but bad engineering, bad execution. There is a well-earned, look, they have a reputation because they earn that reputation for putting out these machines. And I had zero interest in it being anything. I had zero hopes. I had zero expectations, low expectations. So I got my hands on one after seeing all the buzz about him. And I first thought that it reminded me a lot of an AJP. That is a Portuguese
man. Yeah.
Portuguese. And so some of us are familiar with the AJP, and I've spent some time with one. And an AJP is a solid machine. It is not cutting edge in terms of, I don't think AJP has picked a particular market philosophy, and I think they're doing a really good job of it. They sort of picked a price point, they picked some design goals, some engineering objectives, and then they're manipulating their methods and materials and construction to fit within that philosophy. And I think that they've really got an interesting product that should be more widely known. So when I was looking at the Kove, it so much reminded me of an AJP in terms of the execution, the methods and materials, the way they went about the design process. There's a lot, I think, that if I was given an AJP and a Kove and all the brands were scratched off and there was nothing that indicated which was which, I knew the AJP bike and I would think, oh, this is an interesting new model that AJP is coming out with. Wow, this is unique.
Yeah.
I would have thought it was an AJP. So it's a great machine. AJPs are great. And so when I approached the Kove, I thought the same thing. Well thought through engineering concepts, the design really well considered, the materials good, and I kept looking for something that I was going to scratch a line through and say, aha, I got you, Kove. Like this is emblematic of that cheap Chinese corner cutting way of building a motorcycle, building a vehicle. And I really went through it looking for that. Now, I didn't tear it apart completely, but pulled the gas tanks off. On one we have in our shop, I pulled the fuel pump out. I have done a certain amount of dissection and then have taken some of the electrical tray out and explored that. And nothing in the materials execution or engineering is, for me anyway, up to this point, has been a disqualifier at all. Like adequate, absolutely adequate. And then I downloaded their manual and then spent a whole afternoon, hours, going through the manual. And we talked about this earlier. KTM manuals are terrible. The fact you have to pay for them is terrible. And then I think that they are not written. And I've talked to, at the KTM Adventure Rally, one of the KTM reps, a technical rep, about the manual and sort of asked in a gentle, kind way, I guess, why do your manuals suck so bad? And his answer was that they're designed for KTM dealerships, and the dealer mechanics are trained on the product, and they have a lot of, they come into a product repair with a lot of experience and understanding of that platform already loaded into the tech. And so the manual doesn't have to be granular because they infer that the tech has got that built in. And then the manual can just give some specs or how to things assemble together or where like timing marks on gears, things like that maybe a tech is not going to remember. And so he'll use the manual as like a quick reference to supplement his experience with some data points. That's the philosophy that the KTM manual is written for. Well, that works if you're a skilled, experienced mechanic. But if you're a DIY guy or a unskilled mechanic, the KTM manual is far from satisfactory. It is incomplete. It does not have troubleshooting guides. The wiring, the electrical troubleshooting sections are absolutely terrible. All it has in the back is like a wiring diagram. They give you a couple of coil tests and stator tests. It underserves the end user, the KTM manual. Now,
there's definitely there's a noted, when you put the two side by side, there's a noted difference between the two.
Yeah. So then I thought, okay, with still this agenda to like, I'm going to knock this Kove off the block, because I'm watching these YouTube videos and people are loving them and they're riding them. Three entered and finished the Dakar Rally. Holy cow. That's amazing. That was impressive. So there's a lot of these accolades that I'm seeing, but I'm still trying to like figure out I want to bring it down a peg. So I get the manual and I fully expect the manual is going to suck. Well, I'm shocked at how amazing the manual is, because the concept I believe the manual does is first of all, it looks very much like a U.S. military manual. So in the military, on the U.S. military, all militaries are probably the same, but you've basically got, young recruits and enlisted men and women who are, they're not worldly, they're not experienced. Often they've come out of high school or whatever. They're young and they don't have a lot of the inference is that they have no prior training or experience on this piece of equipment. And so the manual has to and should and does break absolutely everything down to the most granular of levels, and then it communicates to someone with absolutely no prior experience. And so with that manual, with the proper like military manual, they're amazing at the ability to communicate technical information and concepts to a unskilled, untrained mechanic. That's how they're designed, and they do it. They're tremendous. The Kove manual is written to that concept. It absolutely. So I think that if I was to like infer what their philosophy was, it's as if they imagined a Kove in Africa with a guy who's a local mechanic, another guy who speaks English, and then a third guy who's like a Russian meter left over from some Russian invasion, and a set of hand tools. And they can use that manual to absolutely diagnose and troubleshoot anything and everything on that bike. I would rather go to Africa on a Kove with the manual in my phone than on a KTM product with the manual in my phone. Because every third world mechanic can make sense, understand, comprehend, and repair that Kove down to the ECU pin level, whereas the KTM manual absolutely does not do that. So the more I learn, investigate, and look into the Kove, the more I am finding that it's a hell of a machine, that the market is long overdue for. The price, the quality, the technical competency of it from the manual perspective to the machine itself. I have yet to like like I said, when I started, I wanted to disqualify and like move on. The Kove sucks, and here's why. Move on. I haven't done that yet.
You haven't found it yet.
No.
And it's interesting because I was talking to Willem Avenant, who's been working with Kove, TacoMoto USA, helping him with a practice bike as he gets ready for the Dakar. So we've talked a lot. I've talked to Mike Johnson of Rally Comp, who's raced both the Sonora Rally and then literally turned right back around and then did the Nora Rally all the way down the peninsula.
I listened to that show.
Yeah. And when I was talking to Willem, we were talking about what you mentioned. You had 3 Koves enter the Dakar, its first year, and all 3 finished.
3 for 3.
And I go, okay, well, you don't get there's a certain amount of luck, but luck at some point runs out in 14 days. A 3-day rally, a 3-day race, a 2-day race, you could get pretty lucky, but you can't get lucky for 14 days in a row and finish. But then the other side of that coin is you're talking about riders that are also not used to riding in that terrain.
Those 3 riders,
they're not going to be as efficient as a Toby Price is or as a Sam Sunderland or any of that. So
they're going to be making mistakes. They're going to be blowing corners. They're going to be going on the bad lines.
Bad timing. To me, the big thing is the dunes. The dune is the great equalizer for any motor. If your motor's got a weak link, you're going to find it in the dune.
Dune's going to blow it up.
And so the fact that these guys that are not used to, like, the Dakar, there's only one place that I've heard of that has dunes like the Dakar, and that just so happens to be in Sonora. And the dunes of the Altar are they're
as close as you're gonna
as
get.
close as
Just
you're gonna get
dunes.
to that.
That's
and
I didn't know that.
the fact that that bike can survive those dunes on both continents and still be asking for more, that is a really, nobody that has ridden those bikes, and that's where I take my cues from, because like you said, there's a lot of people on the internet that are, well, it doesn't have this, and this is, my DRZ 400 has more power than it, and the suspension is this, and the suspension is that, and there's a lot of things that become subjective to that. It's like, well, it just depends on the rider. It just depends on how you're riding the thing, where you're riding the thing. The guys that race in northern Baja California are used to a very, very rough road. When you say whoops, and you think automatically Zoo Road in San Felipe.
Yeah.
70 miles of just handing your ass,
6 foot whoops.
Yeah, with absolutely no rhythm. And I don't know what they're like now after 40-inch tall, 1,000 horsepower trophy trucks and now double-digit entries on that class. And then you go, okay, well, I'm going to go do a local race down in Baja California Sur. It's all fire roads down there, fire roads and silt beds. We hit some whoops. It was some sand whoops for about a mile. It varying terrain. So how can how can you take somebody from down south, bring them up north, and somebody from up north and take them down south to race on bikes, whatever bike it is, and expect to have the same review, right? The same, this guy, you may think that this is, the roughest thing you've ever seen in the world. And this guy's like, dude, I do that, to warm up, so what I've noticed the most about the Kove, as far as the media and the social side of it goes, is just there's been a lot of opinions and a lot of stuff, but nobody's found, like you're saying, nobody's found the thing. This is the reason why you should not buy.
Disqualifier.
Yep.
There really isn't.
There isn't.
It's not reliability. It's not durability. It's not performance. There are people on the internet who will say, and they'll do YouTube videos and they'll say it's underpowered. I think that's I think that's a flawed judgment. So I think that's a cut and paste. We talked about this earlier. I happen to personally know and like a lot of people out on the YouTubes who are making motorcycle content. Mm-hmm. And I also think there's some inherent Me Too-ism that happens where one person will say a thing and that sort of gets picked up and internalized by another person. And there's a lot of cut and paste commenting that's happening out there in YouTube reviews about this Kove. And one of the things I think the two things that I think I hear the most, three things, mm-hmm. China, stiff suspension, and underpowered. First of all, China. I am apolitical. I don't have any opinion about whether or not it's a Chinese bike or mm-hmm. not. To me, it's a machine that exists. I don't really care where it came from. Now, would I like it to be made in the U.S.? Of course. I wish the United States had, I kind of am sad that I'm riding these Austrian bikes. I wish they were American bikes. I wish everything that I rode and had opportunity in the marketplace to buy was produced by someone I knew, someone I could go to a factory and talk to, made in the U.S., mm-hmm. not the reality. And so the fact that it's not American, to me, puts it in the same class as a Austrian bike or a German bike or a Chinese bike. I'm agnostic as to country of origin in that respect.
Yeah.
I have no political stance as far as the Chinese government. Mm-hmm. I will say, in terms of that it's Chinese, I'm interested in the people and the players. So, for example, it's got a Zhongshan motor in it. Mm-hmm. I said that wrong. Mm-hmm. The NS 450, I think, is the name of that engine. I have spent a lot of time researching who Mr. Zhongshan is. Mm-hmm. Fascinating character. There's a lot to know about the people behind these products instead of just wiping a hand and saying, well, it's a Chinese bike and disqualify it. Yeah. That's as ignorant as saying in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s to Mr. Honda saying, oh, that's a Japanese motorcycle, disqualify it. Mm-hmm. That is ignorant, wrong, and stupid. And the fact that the Chinese government may have issues politically with them doesn't negate the fact that these are passionate engineers who are creating machines from a place of real desire, mm-hmm. and they're real people, and the people that make those motorcycles are real people.
Yeah.
And I have spent time to learn who some of these people are and some of their attitudes and agendas and motives. And I resonate. They're me. I'm them. We are passionate enthusiasts.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't disqualify, to me, the fact that it's Chinese and the trolls who feel it disqualifies it for them, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But it doesn't disqualify it for me. So China, no, I don't have a problem with it at all, morally, ethically, in any way whatsoever. Then the
suspension being harsh
it is harsh for an enduro rider. So when I rode my Kove, it was harsh and it beat me up when I tried to hard enduro it and I tried to ride it as an ADV bike. But then when I rode it as it is intended, unforking believable.
Yeah.
Easily one of the best suspended, best handling chassis for a bike in its class, for what it's for. When it's ridden in its dynamic window, unbelievable.
Yeah.
For a $9,000, $8,000 or $9,000 motorcycle that I didn't turn a single nut or screw on, I just rode it as it was delivered. Easily one of the best in the pocket, out of the crate, designed for its use case motorcycle that I've seen in a long, long time.
Yeah.
10 out of 10 when it's ridden in its dynamic range.
Yeah.
Shockingly good.
Yeah.
Terrible for hard enduro, terrible for light ADV, but that's not its design use case.
What it wasn't,
It didn't come out of the box pretending to be that. It is exactly what it says it is. And then the third thing was, what was the third thing? So Chinese, suspension, power. And then maybe a fourth one would be like quality and reliability. That's proven because I talked about the manual,
finishes,
Yes. Okay. So I think reliability is not really an issue. And then in terms of power, this is where I think a lot of the YouTube blah gets it wrong, that it's underpowered. Well, no, it's not underpowered at all. It has 45 horsepower stock. That's impressive. That's impressive. A stock KTM 500 makes 38 horsepower. So it's a weakling compared to the stock Kove. I rode mine for 3 days in Death Valley. A lot of wide open stuff, a lot of high speed stuff, a lot of things that would be rally use case for, and never, ever, once, ever did I think, I wish I had 10 more on this thing. Never once. It is exactly in the pocket. So people who say it's underpowered are either on the wrong bike or riding it in an incorrect, they're applying a use case. They want it to be something that it's not, or they just need to stop parroting. Like that's just a cut and paste negative comment. They want to say a negative thing about it because, my truth was, and I explained, like I wanted to hit it and have a negative, find fault with it, but I'm really not finding a lot wrong with it.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to parrot that dumb comment because it's inaccurate and untrue and incorrect. Because if you do find it's underpowered, which there are riders out there who probably that's valid for them, then this is the wrong bike for you.
Yeah. No, and then that's I think it's really important to see it because, we were talking about this earlier is the whole manual side of things, right? And we no longer, we're all guilty of this. And if you're watching and you're about to disagree with what I'm saying is you need to have a moment with yourself. But we are now in the age of, by the time you purchase something, you've already seen a YouTube video on it. There was a YouTube video, there was a review, there was a influence from somewhere that said, this is why you should get it. Or you saw that and said, yeah, I like that review, or I like what I'm seeing, so I'm going to get it before you even get it. Now, that's where comments and things like that are very dangerous because they're influencing. Well, I rode two of them. I rode one with the Pro ECU in it, the 5-degree key in it, and, the race exhaust. And then I rode a bone stock as it's supposed to be. Is it underpowered? Yeah. But I was comparing it to my 500 Enduro that's got the ECU. It's been dynoed. It's got an open exhaust in it. I made that thing as light as possible. And yeah, that thing was literally designed and bred to be a rocket ship. Like literally, Husqvarna didn't design it to be a Sunday cruiser. They geared it accordingly. They geared it for that particular case. And, for me, once you start riding the Kove, I felt immediately better on the Kove, even just in that short stint, because of the power. I wasn't worried about hitting something and whiskey throttling it because the bike was linear where it needed to be. And the suspension, you know, my case, okay, fine. Yeah, the suspension's hard and it sucks. But
not at speed, not the way it's designed to be ridden.
well, no, I'll beg to differ. We'll go, you know what? Blanket statement, the suspension sucks. But if you think about it, when you talk to anybody about getting a bike and you say, I want to throw some money at it, what's the first thing they tell you to do?
Oh,
spend the money on the suspension.
Malcolm Smith would say if you have 100, spend 99 on the suspension.
Exactly. So why are, you know, so then it's like, yeah, okay, cool. It's
so to your point, all suspension sucks.
Yeah.
Because it all has limitations based on it's not for you. They didn't think of you when they designed it, but you are thinking of you, and so you're gonna fine tune it. Okay, and valid. That's totally valid.
And I think and I think that's how people should look at it. And so if you I'll warn you now, if you ever hear a review, and I'll say specifically with suspension, because it's not sealed shut. And you know, you look at Race Tech and you look at all of these, you know, WP has their own line, and K-Tech, and I would never get to the bottom of the list of suspension companies that are out there that make springs, that make valves, that make valve shims.
It's endless.
It's endless that make seals. So why does that even become a conversation with these bikes? You know, it's like the suspension. So, well, yeah, cool story. But
the suspension on the stock KTMs used to suck.
Oh, yeah.
Finally, in 24, I think they figured it out. But from like 17 through 23, KTM stock WP enduro bike suspension, total downer.
4CS.
Total down.
I won't name names, but when I literally talk to somebody that their paycheck has WP written on it, and they say the first thing you need to do is get rid of those forks, there is no fixing them, then that says something. So again, we go back, it's kind of the same thing. So why, like, suspension shouldn't be, because it's not a finite thing.
Yeah.
Unless you're the guy they designed it for. And even then, because what did they say, right?
165 to 185.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to be a kind of a double track trail rider, weighing that for that suspension to be for you. If you're anything outside of that, it's gonna suck, I can validate that it does.
Yeah, and even then, you know, it's like you can take 5 guys at 165 or an average 165 pounds, put them on the bike, and all 5 of them will likely have a different opinion of it, or they'll all be pretty similar, but then they're going to say, yeah, but I wish I had a little more here. Well, the easiest thing I could relate that to is riding in the sand. There's some people that are deathly terrified running in the sand. I mean, it's like they see sand and they absolutely panic.
Yeah.
And there's other people that are like,
charge it, love it,
enjoy it, I'll ride sand all day. And then there's people in the middle that are kind of, you know, intimidated. So whoops are another thing. Rough terrain is another thing. You know, if you freak out and slow down, that suspension is going to work differently than if you carried your speed and skipped over a couple of things, and then you would have felt that plushness in it. But if you slow down and your first impression is hard, the problem is that there's too many variables with that. Now, horsepower, okay, I could kind of, but you're just a gearing change, an ECU tune away, getting it.
Some exhaust.
Yeah, to get it a little better, right? You know, but suspension is just such a broad subject.
So I think what you're saying is anybody who complains about the suspension is applying a flawed metric. You can't expect stock suspension to please everybody, and it shouldn't, and it won't, and it doesn't. And if this doesn't please you, then that's on you. Get it fixed, get it sorted, get it revalved.
And if you think that I shouldn't have to get it fixed, I mean, that's kind of harsh, but okay, fine. Go spend another $4,000 on an Austrian bike, and you're going to have the same.
And you're going to spend more money to fix that Austrian suspension than you did on that.
Than you would have done on the Kove
suspension.
The Kove thing is nice. Is that we know that they took some cues from some of the other companies, and you can bolt on suspension from other bikes. I'm doing a retrofit on mine, and that's mind you, that bike came from a racing, like, they were out to beat it, you know, kind of bike. So the suspension was worn out and it was time for a rebuild.
Okay.
So I got it, and it's like, okay, well,
it's upgraded.
Yeah, I'm just well, you know what? Like, I was gonna do the Showa stuff anyway, so let's just do the Showa stuff. Well, now it comes with KYB. Now the bikes that you order come with the KYB stuff. Okay, cool. And I know there was comments about the suspension and about like, well, my suspension guy won't work on it and they won't do this. I saw a lot of that, and it's like, okay, I understand. And you know what? I work at a shop too. There's certain bikes we don't want to work on, and there's just because they end up being a rabbit hole, and it is what it is. And we don't want to upset the customer at times. It's like, yeah, we're willing to work on it, but it's going to be double. Why? Because I can see that the bike is rusted. I can see that the panels is sunken.
Clapped out machines.
Yeah, and you're not trying to be a dick, but you're just trying to like relay it to them. Like, look, So anyway, back to the suspension. Well, what I've heard and the feedback that I've gotten is that the suspension was way tight and a pain in the ass to take apart. That's weird because usually people think that when it's Chinese and it's I shouldn't say Chinese. When it's of that quality that they're expecting it to be because of the country of origin
and price point
price point.
Yep.
That it's going to be
sloppy loose,
sloppy, crappy. So I'm like, okay, sloppy loose is me just trying to build it as fast as possible and not paying attention. Tight means I was trying to get it right and then ended up on the tighter side of the spectrum because it probably would go together a lot easier if the specs were a little bit looser. The tolerances were done. And so that conversation, like I guess we could beat the suspension conversation to a pulp and the end result ends up being the same. 80% of the people out there will probably never like stock suspension on a bike that they get. I mean, that's a pretty big number, but I think that's true. And if they haven't realized it yet, once they do venture in getting their suspension done and adjusted for them, now we're talking. Now there's a different.
Okay, so I understand everything you're saying and I'm tracking and I agree. So you own one, I own one now, or have a good long-term loan or relationship with Gary at Kove USA.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll probably get one and add one permanently to our fleet.
Mm-hmm.
I have yet to find something that has disqualified that bike from my interest. You agree that you don't have anything. You own one and you're getting ready to start racing it. So the only thing that I find fault with it is that it doesn't right now in its stock form as I have it. Now I have the version that is it's like the middle version.
Mm-hmm.
So it came with titanium exhaust. It has, it's that middle package, not the base model, not the EX model. It's the one in the middle. And I don't know what.
Yeah. It's like their kind of a pro off-road pro version. Yeah.
Somebody who knows more about it than I do would know exactly which model I have.
Mm-hmm.
So it does not make for me right now, as it is, a very good and desirable light ADV bike. The reason I'm interested, the only reason, not only, but the primary reason I'm interested in that bike is because it's an 8-gallon adventure bike. I look at that and I see 8-gallon adventure bike, which is mind-blowing because that opens up Baja in a way that a 500 carrying the most I can put on a 500 is 4.5 gallons of gas. And if I put a 5-gallon gas bladder bag, a great giant loop, armadillo bag, I can do 5 gallons. So I can have, 9.5, almost 10 gallons of gas. Amazing. That's pretty cool. Except that's so much weight all distributed in weird ways and up high. And so to have 8 gallons of fuel carried low down at your feet, and then in the rear end, and the subframe is basically a gas tank. Mm-hmm. That's a rally bike. Rally bikes are designed basically when an engineer sits down to design a rally bike, he basically says, okay, I need to have a rider display information equipment here and then fuel everywhere else.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just put wheels and a frame around that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the design philosophy behind a rally bike. That is fabulous because you've got weight distribution throughout the machine that you can feel, but it feels way different riding 8 gallons. I would rather ride 8 gallons on a Kove than 4.5 gallons on a KTM.
Mm-hmm.
KTM, the weight is up high. And then that fuel slosh feel is absolutely noticeable.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when I was riding the Kove, as the fuel would drop, yes, you could feel the bike lighten up, but I never felt the slosh effect because the fuel tanks on the Kove on the front are narrow. They're narrow and tall. And so any sloshing you get is going to go vertical. It's not really going to go horizontal.
Mm-hmm.
And so even though you have 2 fuel chambers, both sloshing, really couldn't feel it. And the fact that the rear end has the high hump for the wheel carve out, again, it almost acts as if there's fuel dampers inside of those tanks.
Mm-hmm.
And so the side slosh effect, while I didn't discern it. I mean, I really tried to understand how it affected the chassis dynamics. I don't think it did a whole lot. And if it did, and I'm sure it did, the physics would say it does, but the rider perception of that would be incredibly low. Whereas on the KTM, it's incredibly high because you have such big tanks with big wings and it's so high, you absolutely can feel slosh effect and the carried weight of that. So I look at that Kove and say, that's an 8-gallon adventure bike, light adventure bike with little to no slosh effect. Sign me up. I'm interested. But it doesn't right now make a very good adventure bike because suspension issues, gearing. I think there's some power issues. It's not trackable. It doesn't lug really well. We've tried all the ECUs and there's some weird inconsistencies in the fueling down low. But I don't fault Kove for not perfecting the down low fueling because a rally bike never runs at 3,000 RPM.
Yeah.
When is Mason or anybody on a Kove doing a rally trying to feather into the power at 2,800 RPM as they negotiate some little rock ledge?
Yeah.
They don't. You're not riding it that way. So I don't fault Kove at all for not perfecting that area of the throttle feel. So what TacoMoto is going to do is we're gonna dissect this model and really reverse engineer the thing, and we're gonna upfit and perfect comfort, usability, the dynamics and the rider the rider dynamics that we know that I want as an enduro rider. I want to be able to like hard enduro that bike. I want to do dumb stuff on that bike. I want to do stuff that it's absolutely not designed for, but I want to push the envelope of what it's capable of on the hard enduro side and then the ADV side, while you and your group of guys perfect out and chase the ultimate settings for the rally side. And I would love to feed you information on how to turn it into a hard enduro bike and a rally bike, and have you feed us information on optimizing it even better for rally, because I would like to, for free, offer the community the parts, the resources, the tips and tricks to make that bike. Because that bike, to me, opens up the ADV world to a class of rider that's priced out on the Austrian bikes.
Yeah.
I don't feel it's very democratic in terms of the price of entry. I think that the Austrian bikes, and I don't want them to change their pricing. It is what it is. But because it's a $12,500 base bike that needs another, sometimes 3 or 4 to really get it to my level anyway, the way I want it. Now I'm into a bike for $16,000, $17,000. That's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
For a lot of riders. And I don't have any problem with anybody who says, I'd love to, I'm riding a DRZ 400 because I can't afford a KTM. Valid. But I think there's a better bike than a DRZ 400 for adventure riding and enduro riding. And I think the Kove is the answer. And so I want to be able to say to somebody who's got $8,000 or $9,000 or $10,000 to spend on a bike, here's maybe a do it all, not quite a do it all, but here's a do a lot machine, and you can go put some bags on it and do an 8 or 9 day ride off this bike, almost stock. Here's a couple of things and some small value items that you could buy and put on it, but it will dramatically change the feel and dynamics of this machine. I think the Kove is that bike. I'm super excited by it.
Yeah, no, and I hear it. I mean, the more from a rider perspective, from an adventure bike. So when this was years back when I started working at BMW, is when I really got in. My first adventure bike, F800 GS Adventure. That was the last model year, was a 2016.
That's an interesting machine.
That was a Rotax motor. You know, the thing might as well be a diesel motor. I mean, the thing, you could literally idle it in third gear and it would pick it right back up. I mean, the thing was, heavy, and so that was my entry into the adventure bikes. And so for a long time, I've been riding adventure bikes, had gone away from riding a dirt bikes. I hadn't owned a dirt bike in years, and then got into that. And as we talked about it offline, was it took a ride with a friend of mine up in the high desert with Gnarly Dave, and for him telling me, he's like, you ride your adventure bike better than you ride the 501. And I was like, man, that's kind of weird. But then it got me thinking about the dynamics of it. It's a heavier bike. It has more power. At that time, it was the KTM 790.
Longer wheelbase.
Longer wheelbase, right? The fuel's down low on the 790. There's a lot of rally characteristics to that. And so it really got me thinking. And when that thought crossed my mind, I'm going, that's the Kove. The Kove is literally the cross between the 501, the dirt bike, we'll just say the dirt bike, the
Race dirt bike, and
race dirt bike,
Euro dirt bike,
and the adventure bike, the weight.
Yeah.
And then I went back to when I first started riding dirt bikes. I couldn't ride my YZ 250F, or was it it's the 254 stroke, but it was the motocross bike that had been set up for Baja, for racing Baja. I got a smoking deal on it, and that was my first dirt bike. And then a few years later, not even, maybe 2 years later, I ended up on a KTM 625 SXC. So yeah, not exactly the best Baja bike, but I learned a valuable lesson, the weight and the stability of it. So now I go back and I start thinking about that, and I go, well, actually, yeah, the Kove does fit that gap where you're going to have a bike that's a little bit more stable. So if you want to go out, ride in the desert, yeah, is it going to be a handful at the sand at 5 miles an hour? Absolutely. You know, when you compare it to another skinny dirt bike, like a 501, a 350, a blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, you're going to be going a lot further. You can do a lot more adventure stuff with it. So I'm really curious to see that as the information and working together on that and getting information out, I'm really curious to see how that continues to grow, you know, how that segment continues to grow. And I even wonder if, you know, Honda and Austria have their eye on what's happening.
No doubt they are.
Because they had to be losing market share.
They are losing sales of their products to the Kove because they don't have a competing valid product. That the Honda Rally 300 is not a rally bike. No. It is not a large. It's a false claim to call it a rally bike. Mm-hmm. For the things that make a rally bike, it doesn't have those things. It's a false flag, and that's why I see in the forums a lot of times the 300 is. People get that bike, and it's one of the most loved and hated bikes out there because I think they are. I don't think they're falsely marketing it, but I think that they're the message of that bike is not what it actually is, and so I think Honda's missing it. KTM clearly they have their rally replica bike, but at 26,000 list plus dealer markup plus unavailability, the exclusivity of it. By the time you got one in the States, 30 grand.
Yeah.
What do you think? You would know.
I've seen 30s. 30 is you got a good deal. I've seen as high as 50.
Okay.
I don't know if it's sold, but you know, they were trying for 50. But yeah, I mean, and
so a realistic price would be 25 or no, 25 is too low. 35.
Yeah.
How many Koves can you get? 3.5?
Yeah.
Koves for the one KTM bike?
One KTM. And then parts, you know, parts is another big one, you know.
To get the parts for the KTM bike.
Yeah. Because the RFR is there's some common stuff, but it seems
a lot of that stuff is one-off.
Yeah, exactly.
One-off.
And don't try and get it around Dakar time because all the parts are headed to Dakar.
Yeah.
So you're not going to see, you know, the parts availability. You know, you've got outfits like BAS Dakar.
But yeah,
you know, with a fleet of these things, it's all like, yeah, if you need the inventory, they have it. You know, so. And
then you're discovering that on the Kove, you know, it's a Yamaha sprocket and whatever it is.
Yeah.
So with your research and others, if I would love to help disseminate some of this information, but like I would love to again hold down and democratize the price and the ease of entry. The Kove represents an ease of entry into our sport. I think we need to have a lower bar, a lower first step. I think we have intentionally, and we talked about this in the last show. Mm-hmm. I think the sport of motorcycling does itself a disservice when it makes that first step so high. You need let's look at it this way. You need a professional to help you climb that first step. I think it's doing it wrong. Mm-hmm. If you at my level with the builds that we talked about, yes, to get to our level, we're the professionals and we're up here for a reason and we don't apologize for that. Mm-hmm. But I'm not chasing the writer who's on a website and is going to get a first bike. The last bike he had was Grandpa's little, two-stroke or whatever.
Mhm.
For somebody to walk into our sport, to walk into a dealer and to try to get into rally, this step is too high.
Mhm.
Kove is changing that because the price is low. And then I think that the community is going to do a really good job of making everything freely available, nothing exclusive. I don't want there to be secrets. You don't have to know a handshake. You don't have to have a passcode. There's no curtain that you need to, have a special knock for it to open for you. This is not this is not a secret club.
Yeah.
It should be for everyone. And I think Kove is they're approaching it with a philosophy and a mindset that is probably got the marketers and product people at KTM and Honda scared and mad and frustrated that they didn't think of it first. Well, work harder.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds, it sounds harsh, but that's their, if you think about the interest in the Dakar and the interest in rally and the interest in it, there's a lot of people that would, if you made the RFR readily available stateside, right? You paid the ridiculous, NHTSA, all their, you jumped through every last hoop to make it, and you made, Euro 5 compliant and all that stuff. And you set a price point of $18K on that bike, right? This is pretty pricey, but you think about, the ready to race level that you're getting about.
Okay.
I would think that it would be one of their hotter selling bikes, because everybody
that would be desirable, huh?
Yeah. You think about, like, I look at it as, and I talk about this with the guys at work. It's like, okay, I had the 790 and I wanted to go back to the BMW because with the BMW, I missed the refinements of the hand controls. I missed the display. I missed the streetability of the bike. Mind you, I threw a ton of money at the 790 and did a bunch of work on that thing, and I took it away.
You tried to get that up to where you were without the BMW.
Well, I really tried to get it up to a dirt bike, is what I did. I did all the rally, the extended suspension on it with the Kashima code and all of this stuff. I mean, it was just the Dakar tanks. I literally built myself the quote unquote RFR, what you could get here without actually buying a 690, right? Because the 690 was built on it. But the message I'm trying to relay is that when you take somebody that's used to riding dirt bikes, if you got a guy that grew up riding dirt bikes and then went and he's got a 500 and he's looking to get into the adventure market, I am willing to bet their first stop is going to be a KTM adventure bike, particularly that 790, 890. Why? Or maybe even the 690. And it's because they grew up riding in the dirt and they want to go into the street, but they're not going to let go of that dirt side of things.
Okay. They want it to be dirt oriented. They want it to be off-road focused.
Exactly. But then you come at it from the other side of it, the guy that always ran street bikes and was always on the road and always doing all that stuff, and then decides, I want to try this adventure bike thing. I'm watching the BDR videos. I'm watching this stuff. I want to do that. They're more apt to go to something like a BMW because they already know the BMW quality.
Okay.
And they already know the bike, or it could be one of the other bikes, right? Now, the Tenere also enters the chat when you talk about big bore or mid-level, mid-size adventure bike. Dirt focused.
And good price.
So you have that, like, there is that market, but is that market, if KTM were to bring it a step down, if, like they have the CF Motos coming out with that MT450, the twin small displacement
interesting
bike.
Very interesting motor.
Right. And so I think they're playing the size game, like they're shuffling it around. But I believe that there's a lot of people that would go to a slightly bigger version of their dirt bike,
which is the 450 Kove,
which would be the 450 Kove, or some kind of equivalent if it was readily available.
Okay.
But it's not. And now, now you got Dakar teams and people going to the Dakar going, well, I can't get an RFR, but I could get a Kove.
Yeah.
And
the EX model is very attractive. We had one at the shop and it is an insane machine.
Yeah. That's the latest gen on it. Yeah. Just offhand, were there things you spotted right away? Like, oh man, this is...
No, we had it in because it has some weird inconsistencies in the fueling, and we So well, I'm very lucky that Dynojet, they make the tuners, piggyback tuners, and power commanders, and their head engineer, Dusty, lives in Las Vegas. And so I have luxurious access to his technical expertise. And so we had Gary brought that EX down, and then we tuned it. So we put it on our dyno. We have a dyno in our shop, and we put a power commander on it and dramatically changed the fueling. And I think he got about 4 or 5 more horsepower out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that machine, for what it costs and what it comes with, carbon fiber, everything, like it's titanium fasteners.
Yeah.
For, I think the MSR on that is 18,000. So 18 is what you had said.
Yeah.
So Kove, I think for $18,000 is going to give you like a valid, ready to race, Dakar spec, rally spec motorcycle. I'm not in that world, and so I can't exactly, it doesn't excite me to the level that it might you, but on paper, that machine is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're exactly spot on. Kove they're scrappy, they're hungry, they want to bring cool product to the market. These guys are legitimate motorcycle people.
Mm-hmm.
To make no mistake about it, whether they're from China or Japan or Austria or the US, to me, that's irrelevant. I don't care. They're legitimate motorcycle people. Yeah. And they looked around. They're clever business people too. They looked around and said, who's not doing what? And can we create market desirability? Can we create demand with a unique product and then create desirability and pull through marketing and through use case applications? And I think they've done it. I think it's a kick-ass platform. I see the potential in it. Yeah. Sports people like yourself see the potential in it. And unless the only thing that's going to disrupt it is if they spoil it themselves through botching the marketing or botching the product. And so far, I don't think they have at all. In fact, one of the things to their credit, remember when Mason had the problem with his a year ago or 2 years ago or whenever it was, the oil line blew? You know what you had? You had the CEO going on social media and saying, we screwed up. This is what we missed. Like we could have changed this or adapted that, and we didn't, and then we had this failure. Lesson learned. We're going back to the factory, and we're going to learn from that. At that same race, you had Austrian bikes that DNF'd. You didn't hear boo about why those things failed, and they could have been something that could have trickled down and benefited the entire, catalog of bikes. And yet you have the transparency and then owning and then getting ahead of issues. KTM, look, here's where KTM is screwed up again with the camshafts on the 790, 890 bikes. Ridiculous. KTM, ridiculous. How?
But that was the reason I got rid of mine.
Honda had camshaft failures on some of their models and valve failures. And look, other manufacturers, when they had failures, far be it for me to tell anybody how to run their business, but other brands led the way by doing recalls and owning up. Like more customer loyalty is generated by saying, we screwed a thing up. We missed a thing. We blundered a thing. Bad on us. Here's what we are going to do to make it right for you, rider and customer. Because motorcycles are used by us as a part of this is our lifestyle. This is part of our mental health program. And here, you have a motorcycle failure that has trickled down psychological effects with riders in the riding community. And we're a close-knit community. I think KTM deserves the black eye that it's receiving from this camshaft issue. Yeah. I think they screwed it up. I think they effed it up in a big way. And if Kove will have technical glitches, if they treat new ones, future ones, like they did with Mason's bike in Dakar, I see no problem at all. I see no problem at all. No. Let things break, let things fail. That's engineering, that's mechanics. But how they handle it, how they handle it will be the mark of the company. And so far, I've seen good results in all aspects. I'm pro Kove. I didn't want to be, truth told. When I started on the journey, I was expecting to be disappointed and then would have laughed, and it would have fed my ego when it fell apart, when it unraveled.
When you found the magic,
but it hasn't.
This pin,
and it hasn't, and it isn't.
And I think that is a very valid point. When that was happening, so that was the reason I got rid of my KTM, the 790. Honestly, it's just I knew that there was a chance. Now, Oil changes, like I didn't even do them annually. I did them when I felt like it needed it, and much sooner than the year. Going out for a ride, it was more like dirt bike-ish type. It's like, I'm going.
So now you're like 30, 20 hours.
Yeah, even that. I mean, the bike didn't even have that many miles on it, and a lot of it were street miles. But that was what
That was the reason why you dumped it.
But I dumped it because I'm going, I don't have faith in this, and I'm a firm believer in Murphy's Law. And what's going to happen is that this cam is going to go when I do decide to go do a Baja trip, and I'm going to walk out to the bike like so many people said, and then the bike just doesn't want to start anymore. Now, I would think I would have noticed it, but cam wear is usually a slow burn. You get used to that lack of power until the bike won't start.
Yeah.
And so it's hard. And the fact that they weren't backing it up, that they weren't being upfront with it. Look, I walked back into BMW after being gone for almost 3 years. I walked back into BMW motorcycles. They had a recall on the double R camshafts, on the inlet camshafts. And the cams that were coming out of the bikes didn't even look worn. I didn't even see one that was actually worn and there was an issue. But BMW said it was enough of an issue for us to say
they got in front of it.
We gotta get it out. And it was literally, it comes in and the customer, oh yeah, we gotta, there's a camshaft recall on it. Oh, what do you mean? And I go, so, hey, look, on this kind of stuff, is they're just jumping ahead.
They're ahead of it.
Yeah.
That produces customer loyalty.
It does. And then, but then the other side of it is, you think about it, like, okay, look at the tolerances that we have on the modern engine now. If it eats a camshaft, if my bike would have eaten a camshaft, I wouldn't have been okay with them just saying, oh, we're just going to throw a cam and a head in it and some followers. I go, well,
what's the underlying cause?
What's the underlying cause? And then not only that, so I'm just curious, where'd all that metal go? Because I know it probably didn't go straight to the filter. It probably made another pass somewhere else.
Or it's putting up down to the bottom of the case. And so you're going to split the case, right? And clean all that out. Because Toyota, with those 8 V8 motors, you know about that, 100,000 motors, they had manufacturing debris in there and wiped those motors out. Yeah. So, like, you're right, that debris went somewhere.
Yeah. So what are we going to, like, that's what's concerning to me, is like, okay, well, I'm used to, and I have that peace of mind with the brand, with BMW, and that's kind of what I got used to. And then to see this and how it was handled, and then where they were putting it back on the owners, I'm like, it just didn't inspire any confidence. And I was like, unfortunately it's time for me to go. But it was just, the value of the bike tanked. There's dealerships now, I don't know if you know this, but word kind of got out, and there's dealerships now that won't even accept that bike in on trade unless they have the cams inspected. Mm-hmm. They literally provide a receipt from a certified shop that went in, checked the cams, and made sure they're okay.
I see.
Talk about resale value. The resale value is gone. So it's, I don't know. It's a challenge. Hopefully
self-inflicted.
It is. There could have been, I'm sure they would have saved a lot more money and made a lot more money if they would have gotten out ahead of it. I don't like negative feedback towards brands, but sometimes, there is a better way of doing it. And I'll just say that it could have been handled better. But here we are. And now we're talking, now there's open doors. Now you got other brands. Honda down in Baja has been, just blowing up. All eyes are on Honda in the Dakar, because now you've got Skylar Howes, you've got Ricky Brabeck on the team doing work, which, by the way, if you guys haven't already and kind of interested in rally, Skylar Howes did a class online where you can go through. I already did it, and it's like 40 lessons or something like that he goes through, and he explains the sport of rally. He explains the bike.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Explains the riding.
That's cool.
It's kind of a whole holistic approach. So if you guys haven't checked it out, I'll put a link for that down below. I don't want to plug it. It's not an affiliated thing. I just think it's really, really good information. Like, I did not know that they do not run bead locks on their tires for the Dakar, for the rally bikes. And I was like, really? That's weird. You're putting lube and all these things that could probably get into it. And it's just simply, it throws the tire majorly out of balance, and they're not going to run wheel weights. And I'm like, okay. And they run a super tight moose. So things that I would have known, I'm like, all right, well, I guess that makes sense. It keeps the tire from chunking funny and doing certain things. And I'm like, wow. So it was kind of cool to see him dropping some knowledge, some insider stuff that, some people may not.
That's cool.
May not have known. So I don't know. That was pretty cool. So what do we think? We talked about the Koves. We talked about the Austrian platforms. What other bikes are we missing? Yeah.
I don't know. We might have to break this into a third show if you want to open up a new topic.
Yeah, there's more platforms there. So I don't know. I think we'll call it. What do you guys think? What's the next up and coming brand? And I mean, let's open it up. Let's hear it. What are the Kove comments? Drop them in the comments below. Let's talk. I'm sure Mike and I will take a look at it and see what we can. There may be another way of thinking about it. There might be something that we hadn't thought about, a maybe different perspective, and so you never know. So you guys are welcome to put your comments down below. As I say, if you guys found some value in this conversation and all that, don't forget, like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell here and on the Taco Mike channels, right? TacoMoto Co.
Yeah. Thanks, Victor, for having us on.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a pleasure. And we're both moto nerds, so we get to talk bike builds. Awesome. All right, guys, we'll see you on the next episode.